They laughed, rolled their eyes, and made racist jokes about the black delivery woman struggling with their fragile shipment. "Careful now, wouldn't want you to break something you can't afford," one sneered. But when she calmly reached into her pocket, pulled out a company ID, and set it down on the counter, the entire room went silent, because they had just insulted the most powerful person in the entire building. And now, she was the one giving orders. The air inside Carter Enterprises headquarters was crisp with artificial coolness, the kind that made everything feel just a little too perfect, the kind that made people forget that outside these towering glass windows, a different world existed. Inside, the employees moved like they belonged there, polished, privileged, and self-assured. The reception desk, a sleek marble monolith, was manned by a bored assistant, scrolling through her phone. And at that moment, a new presence entered the room. A black delivery woman stepped in, a large package balanced in her arms. The box was clearly fragile, labeled with bright red warnings, but it was bulky, awkward. She adjusted her grip, carefully maneuvering past the sleek leather chairs and the designer-clad employees who barely spared her a glance. And then, the whispers started. A group of executives near the water cooler exchanged smirks. A junior associate chuckled under his breath, nudging his co-worker. Then came the comments. "Hope you don't drop that. Probably costs more than you make in a year." "A little heavy for you? Should we call someone stronger?" "She's probably late too." "They always are." The assistant at the reception desk barely looked up as she sighed dramatically and held out a clipboard. "Sign here. And next time, take the back entrance. Deliveries don't come through the front." The room filled with quiet laughter, the kind meant to sting without being outright cruel. But Maya Carter didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't argue. Instead, she set the package down on the counter and reached into her pocket. Click. A smooth black ID card hit the marble surface with an audible slap. It was the kind of badge that didn't belong to a delivery worker. Not here. At first, no one reacted. Then, one of the executives leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the name on the card. And suddenly, the smiles vanished. The blood drained from the assistant's face as she stared at the words printed in bold silver letters. Maya Carter, CEO and majority shareholder, Carter Enterprises. Mark Reynolds, the senior manager who had been leading the mockery, opened his mouth, then closed it. Another executive stammered, "Wait, this must be a mistake." But it wasn't. Maya slowly, deliberately picked up her ID, slid it back into her pocket, and then looked each of them in the eye. Her voice, calm and unshaken, cut through the silence like a blade. "So this is how you treat people when you think they don't matter?" Not a single person could answer. And now Maya was the one giving orders. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. A moment ago they had been laughing at her, belittling her, dismissing her. Now their mouths were dry, their palms sweaty, their minds racing to make sense of what had just happened. Mark Reynolds, the senior manager who had led the jeering, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Carter, we didn't realize—" Maya tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "Didn't realize what?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "That the person you were mocking had power, that suddenly your words mean something now." Mark's jaw clenched. He knew he had screwed up, but he wasn't used to being the one scrambling for control. The receptionist, who had barely looked up before, was now stiff as a statue, horror dawning in her eyes. The junior associates who had giggled along with the jokes were desperately avoiding eye contact. Maya let the moment stretch before she finally spoke again. "You don't have to answer. I already know." She reached for the package, the same one they had mocked her for carrying, and easily lifted it again. "Let's take a walk." As she moved through the office, the weight of her past pressed against her like a second skin. Maya hadn't always been the woman who commanded a billion-dollar company. She had grown up in a neighborhood where success stories were rare and opportunities even rarer. Her parents had worked themselves to exhaustion just to make sure she had a shot at something better. And she had taken that shot, graduating at the top of her class, earning a business degree, and clawing her way up the ranks in an industry that never expected her to succeed. She had started Carter Enterprises from nothing, turning a small logistics startup into a corporate powerhouse. She had built this company brick by brick, and yet, somehow, even within the walls of her own empire, racism and entitlement had taken root. And now she had seen it for herself. Maya had heard whispers, complaints from lower-level employees about discrimination, reports of a culture problem in certain departments, an anonymous email saying, "If you weren't the owner, you wouldn't last a day here." So she had done something no CEO would ever do. She went undercover. No cameras, no assistants, no corporate entourage, just herself, a uniform, and the truth. And in less than 1 hour, she had already seen the problem firsthand. Maya led the group through the pristine glass-walled office spaces, the same ones she had worked years to build. Mark followed, his usual arrogance replaced with unease. "Miss Carter, She held up a hand. The sheer authority in that small gesture shut him up instantly. When they reached the main conference room, Maya set the package down carefully, then turned to face them. "I built this company to be different," she said, her voice steady. "I built it so people wouldn't have to fight to be respected in their own workplace. But clearly, somewhere along the way, things have gone wrong." A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down at the floor, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. "Tell me something," she continued, her gaze locking onto Mark. "If I hadn't walked in here today, would this have happened to someone else? Would you have treated them the same way?" Mark hesitated. His face twitched with the urge to lie, to cover himself, but he knew there was no good answer, because the truth was obvious. The air in the room grew heavier. And Maya? She wasn't done yet. The weight of Maya's question hung in the air, suffocating. Mark opened his mouth to speak, then shut it again, his usual smooth arrogance replaced with something raw and uncertain. Maya's gaze never wavered. She wasn't here for stammered excuses. She wasn't here for empty apologies. She was here for the truth, and she could see it all over their faces. The receptionist, who had barely looked up when she first entered, suddenly straightened her posture as if good manners could erase the past 5 minutes. "Miss Carter, I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a misunderstanding." A junior executive, one of the men who had laughed along, chimed in quickly, desperate to separate himself from the sinking ship. "Yeah, Mark was the one who—" Maya held up a single hand, and all sound died instantly. "Don't waste my time blaming each other." Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that preceded an earthquake. "I want to know something else." She turned slightly, scanning the faces of every employee who had been in the room when the mockery happened. "When you saw me struggling with that box, how many of you saw a person? Not a worker, not someone beneath you, but a person." Silence. A few people swallowed hard. A few looked down at the table, but nobody spoke, because they all knew the answer. And Maya did too. Mark forced a chuckle, trying to regain some of his usual confidence. "Miss Carter, let's not blow this out of proportion. This was just some harmless joking among colleagues. No offense was intended, really." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Tell me something, Mark. Would you have made those same jokes if I had walked in here wearing this?" She reached into her pocket again and flashed her CEO ID badge. Mark's smirk faltered for just a second, but Maya caught it. "That's what I thought." She took a slow step forward, and Mark instinctively took a step back. "You don't joke like that when you think someone has power over you. You only do it when you think you're safe, when you think the person you're mocking has no voice, no consequences to give you." The room was dead silent now. Mark's face reddened, and Maya saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Not regret, but resentment. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he had been caught. And that only fueled her next move. Before Mark could try another excuse, a new voice broke the silence. "Miss Carter, this isn't just about today." Everyone turned. A young black woman, Lisa, stood near the edge of the room, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was one of the few black employees in this department, and Maya had noticed her flinching at every microaggression earlier. Lisa hesitated, then steeled herself and continued. "This is just how it is here. If you don't fit the mold, you're ignored at best and ridiculed at worst. I've been here 2 years, and I've watched people like Mark and his friends decide who gets promoted and who gets left behind." Maya's jaw tightened. And who usually gets left behind? Lisa took a shaky breath. People who look like me. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few people exchanged nervous glances. Others shifted uncomfortably, but nobody denied it. And that was all the confirmation Maya needed. Maya exhaled slowly, as if she had given them all one last chance to say something, anything, that might redeem them. But when nobody did, she reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small, sleek device, and pressed a button. The room erupted with sound. Their own voices played back to them. The racist jokes, the laughter, the sneers, everything they had said when they thought they were safe. Some employees went pale. One man covered his mouth in horror. The receptionist looked like she might faint. Mark went stiff, his jaw clenched, his entire body tensed like a cornered animal. And for the first time, Maya saw real fear in his eyes. She pressed pause. The silence that followed was deafening. "So tell me, Mark." Maya's voice was sharper now, more direct. "Still think this was just harmless joking?" Mark didn't answer. He couldn't, because he knew what came next. And this time, there was nowhere left to hide. Mark stood frozen, his lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, anything that could save himself. But what could he say? The evidence was right there, playing in his own voice. Maya let the moment stretch, watching as the weight of their own words settled over the room like a thick, choking fog. "You see," she finally said, her tone eerily calm, "I didn't come here today looking for trouble. I came here looking for the truth." Her eyes locked onto Mark, then slowly scanned the rest of the employees. "And the truth is worse than I thought." Mark's hands curled into fists, his face burning red. "Miss Carter, please," the receptionist piped up nervously, her voice high-pitched and shaky. "It was just a misunderstanding. We didn't mean any harm." Maya arched an eyebrow. "Didn't mean any harm?" She gestured toward Lisa, who still stood near the doorway, shoulders tense, eyes filled with a lifetime of silent battles. "Tell that to every employee who's been passed over, disrespected, or forced to shrink themselves just to survive in this company." A few of the employees lowered their heads. Others remained stiff, unwilling to admit fault. But then, Lisa took a step forward. "Miss Carter, it's not just this office. It's everywhere." Maya's gaze snapped to her. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated, but then a spark of courage lit in her eyes. "Ever since I started here, I've seen it. Black and brown employees being pushed to the side, passed over for promotions we deserve, getting cut off in meetings while our ideas are taken by someone else. HR doing nothing when we report it. And if we speak up," Lisa let out a dry, humorless laugh, "we're called too aggressive, not a culture fit, difficult to work with." A heavy silence filled the air. Maya's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the conference table. She had built Carter Enterprises to be a company that valued diversity, that gave people a fair shot, that didn't tolerate this kind of discrimination. And yet, it was happening, right under her nose. Lisa exhaled shakily, then looked Maya dead in the eye. "If you hadn't walked in here as a delivery worker, you never would have seen it. You would have gotten the same polished smiles, the same fake respect." A harsh truth, one Maya couldn't ignore. She turned back to the rest of the room. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice like ice. "This culture I just witnessed, how deep does it go?" No one answered, but their silence was answer enough. Mark, still trying to salvage something from the wreckage, forced a stiff chuckle. "Miss Carter, we don't have a culture problem. It's just a few misunderstandings, a few misplaced jokes." Maya's head tilted slightly. "A few?" Her tone was deceptively soft. "Dangerous. Well, that's funny," she continued, reaching into her bag again. Mark visibly tensed. She pulled out a thin black folder, then opened it, revealing pages upon pages of internal complaints, anonymous reports, HR filings, emails from employees describing the very behavior she had just experienced firsthand. "Because according to these," Maya said smoothly, "it's been happening for years." The room collectively inhaled. Mark's face went from red to ghostly pale. The receptionist visibly swallowed. One of the junior executives took a step back, as if trying to physically distance himself from the inevitable fallout. Maya slowly closed the folder, then placed it on the table with a soft thud. "So now," she said, leaning forward slightly, "I have to ask myself, what do I do with this information?" Mark finally broke. "Miss Carter, please," he stammered. I've been a loyal employee for years. You can't just—" Maya held up a single finger. "Shh." Mark immediately went silent. Then, with calm, absolute authority, she said, "I can do whatever I want." And just like that, the power had shifted forever. The weight of Maya's words crushed the room like a collapsing ceiling. Mark swallowed hard. His usual smug confidence shattered into something desperate and raw. Lisa, standing near the door, exchanged a knowing glance with Maya, a silent confirmation that finally, someone in power was listening. But listening wasn't enough. Maya took a slow breath, then straightened. "Here's what's going to happen." Her tone was measured, controlled, but beneath it was pure, unshakable authority. "As of this moment, an internal audit is being launched. Every single discrimination complaint that's been ignored. I want them on my desk by the end of the day." A low murmur rippled through the room. The receptionist shifted uncomfortably, looking toward Mark, as if waiting for him to intervene. But Mark looked like a man on a sinking ship. "Miss Carter," he started, his voice suddenly softer, oily with false humility. "Let's be reasonable. You're talking about shaking up the entire company over one misunderstanding." Maya's head tilted slightly, her gaze sharpening. "One misunderstanding." She reached out and tapped the folder of complaints on the table. "This isn't one misunderstanding, Mark. It's a pattern, a culture, a disease growing inside my company." She stepped closer, lowering her voice just slightly. "And if you think I'm about to ignore it, then you don't know me at all." Mark's last attempt to save himself. Mark's jaw tightened. He was losing control, and he knew it. So he tried a new tactic. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, stepping forward, lowering his voice like they were suddenly old friends. "I've been with this company for years. I know how things work, and I know how messy situations like this can get." He forced a chuckle, trying to regain his composure. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. Let's talk. Just you and me, behind closed doors. I'm sure we can figure something out." A last-ditch effort, an unspoken bribe. But Maya didn't flinch. If anything, her eyes darkened. "Behind closed doors," she repeated, her voice like a blade. Mark blinked. The moment he realized his mistake was the moment he knew he was done. Maya turned, walking slowly back toward the head of the conference table. Then she pressed a button on the sleek black panel embedded in the table's surface. The intercom activated, and across every floor of Carter Enterprises headquarters, her voice boomed through the speakers. "Attention, all employees." A shiver ran through the room. "Effective immediately, there is a full investigation being launched into workplace discrimination and misconduct. Any employee found engaging in racist, sexist, or unethical behavior will be dealt with accordingly." A few gasps echoed in the distance. Phones were already vibrating with incoming texts. Mark? He was deathly silent, because he knew he was first on the list. The beginning of the end. Maya turned back to Mark, her voice quieter now, but even more dangerous. "You wanted to speak behind closed doors." She leaned in just slightly. "You don't deserve closed doors." Mark's breath hitched. The room wasn't just Maya's anymore. Now, the entire company was watching. Mark's face was pale, his breathing uneven. The entire company had heard Maya's announcement. Every employee, every department, from the lowest intern to the board of directors. There was nowhere left to hide. The junior executives who had laughed earlier were already stepping away from him, distancing themselves like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The receptionist, who had smirked as she dismissed Maya earlier, now stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched a pen. But Mark wasn't going down without a fight. "You can't just do this," he hissed, his voice low but laced with rage and desperation. "You're putting the entire company at risk." Maya raised an eyebrow, utterly unfazed. "You think I built this company just to let people like you poison it?" Mark's hands curled into fists. "Miss Carter," he growled, his fake professionalism slipping away entirely. "I've been a key player in this company's success for years. I have relationships, connections. If you try to take me down, I'll make sure people turn against you." Maya let out a slow, measured breath. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek USB drive. Mark stilled instantly. His face blanched. "You recognize this, don't you?" Maya said smoothly. Mark's eyes darted to the drive, then back to her face. "You don't have anything on me," he spat. But his voice wavered. Maya's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "See, that's the thing about power, Mark. The people who abuse it." She twirled the USB between her fingers, letting the moment stretch. "They always think no one is watching." Then she placed the USB drive on the conference table. "This," she said, tapping it lightly, "contains every unethical hiring decision you've made, every email where you pushed out qualified employees of color, every report that HR conveniently misplaced." Mark's breath hitched. Maya leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your secrets? They're not secrets anymore." Mark's composure snapped. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled, stepping closer. For the first time, his true colors bled through completely. "You think you can just walk in here and humiliate me? Do you know how many people here actually respect me? I built this damn department. You were just the money behind it." Gasps rippled through the room. A few employees instinctively stepped back. "Maya." She didn't even blink. "You built it," she repeated, her voice a quiet, simmering storm. "I own it." Then she turned toward the HR director, who had just rushed into the room, his face tense with panic. "How long would it take to process a termination request?" she asked, her voice cold as steel. The HR director hesitated. Well, technically, effective immediately," she interrupted. Mark staggered back, his mouth opening in shock. You can't just fire me like this." Maya tilted her head. "Oh, Mark." Her voice dripped with finality. "Watch me." The HR director hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Understood, Miss Carter." He reached for a folder and, in a swift, deliberate motion, placed Mark's termination papers in front of him. Mark stared at the papers like they were a death sentence. Because, in a way, they were. He had spent years thriving in this toxic culture, thinking he was untouchable. And now, it was all over in a matter of minutes. Maya crossed her arms. "Sign the papers, Mark." Mark looked up at her, hatred burning behind his eyes. But he saw it now. The fight was over. With a hand that shook with rage, he snatched the pen and scrawled his signature across the page. The second the ink dried, Maya picked up the USB and pocketed it. "Security will escort you out." Mark let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "This company won't survive without me, you know." Maya just smiled. "Oh, I think we'll be just fine." And as Mark was dragged out of the office, his career in ruins, Maya turned back to the employees, still standing in the conference room. "Anyone else want to test me?" Not a single person spoke, because they all knew. The old way of doing things was over. The doors slammed shut behind Mark as security escorted him out of the building. His footsteps faded into nothing, swallowed by the weight of his downfall. Inside the conference room, the remaining employees stood frozen, as if still processing what had just happened. The room that once dripped with arrogance and entitlement now felt like a crime scene. The perpetrators had been caught, exposed, and sentenced. And now, it was time to rebuild. Maya turned toward the HR director, her expression unreadable. "You're going to conduct a full audit of every department," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I want a report on every instance of workplace discrimination, every overlooked promotion, every hiring bias." The HR director, who had once conveniently ignored these issues, nodded quickly, his forehead already beading with sweat. "Yes, Miss Carter. We'll get started right away." Maya's eyes flickered with warning. "See that you do. And if I find out that anyone tried to cover anything up," she let the silence stretch, letting the unspoken threat linger. "Well, you just saw what happens to people who think they're untouchable." The HR director swallowed hard, then practically ran out of the room. Just as Maya turned to leave, a soft voice broke through the tension. "Miss Carter." Maya turned. Lisa stood there, hands clenched at her sides. But this time, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't holding back. "What happens next?" Lisa asked. It wasn't just about Mark. It wasn't just about today. It was about every employee like her who had been ignored, belittled, or told to stay silent. Maya studied her for a long moment. Then she walked over and did something no CEO had ever done in that office before. She handed Lisa a folder. Lisa took it hesitantly, then glanced at the title. Carter Enterprises Leadership Development Program. New candidate selections. Her eyes widened. I need new leaders in this company, Maya said, her voice steady. Leaders who understand what it's like to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to fight twice as hard for the same opportunities. Lisa stared at the folder like it was a lifeline. You're giving me a chance? Maya smiled for the first time that day. I'm giving you what you already earned. Lisa exhaled shakily, nodding. Thank you, Miss Carter. I won't waste it. Maya gave her a knowing look. I know you won't. Word spread quickly through the company. Mark's firing went public. His network of friends in high places? They cut ties instantly. Other executives resigned before they could be investigated. Those who stayed knew the rules had changed. Diversity and inclusion programs were no longer optional talking points. They were now core business priorities. The entire culture of Carter Enterprises shifted overnight. Employees who had once walked on eggshells now stood taller. The company thrived, not despite the changes, but because of them. And at the top of it all, Maya Carter, no longer just the CEO. Now, she was the symbol of what happens when justice finally arrives. A week later, Carter Enterprises felt like a different place. The tension that had once suffocated the hallways was gone. The hushed whispers of exclusion and quiet oppression had faded into the past, replaced by something new, something stronger. Respect. Maya walked through the office, watching as employees, all employees regardless of background, spoke with confidence in meetings, took up space they had once shrunk away from, and worked in an environment where they no longer had to second-guess their worth. She paused near the front desk, the same spot where she had been dismissed and mocked just days ago. The receptionist, a different one now, the previous having resigned under immense pressure, stood abruptly, her face flustered. Miss Carter, can I help you with anything? Maya's lips curved slightly, number just making sure things are running the way they should. As she turned to leave, Lisa caught up with her, clutching a neatly organized binder. Miss Carter? Maya raised an eyebrow. Yes? Lisa exhaled sharply, then smiled. A real, unburdened smile. I just wanted to say, I think people see the company differently now. Because of you. Maya let the words settle before responding. Not because of me, Lisa. Because of all of us. It just took someone willing to shake the foundation. Lisa nodded, her grip tightening around the binder filled with the future she never thought she'd have. As Maya walked toward the exit, she glanced at the front counter one last time. The same place where they had laughed at her, where they had thought she was nobody. And now they would never forget her name. As she pushed the door open, the final words echoed in her mind. Words that would define this company from this day forward. Respect isn't given by a title. It's proven through actions. And today, they learned that lesson the hard way.